So I'll do a really brief introduction to who I am. My name is Desiree Shead and I run a producing organisation that's based in Bradford. We established ourselves about 10 years ago, and on average I write about 40 applications a year to Arts Council England, which is way too many, but it does mean that I've learned some of the tricks and tactics that I'm really happy to share with you today. So I'm just going to really quickly cover this Let's Create strategy because it's quite new for us all, and so it's something that we're all still getting our heads around. And so basically, Arts Council England have said that by 2030, they would like England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and that everybody has accessible to like a remarkable high quality cultural experience. So this really is about them trying to engage everybody, and I think they're acknowledging some of their failures around that historically. And I don't know about you guys, but even when I say the point and the language, it's really easy to see how people have sort of been missed. So hopefully, as we move forward, we can start to make this much more accessible for people. They've got 3 outcomes when they're talking about Let's Create. So creative people is one of them, and I think it's really important to focus like on the people here, and the reason why it's useful to go through this before the actual process is because this can really help you make decisions about the kind of project that you might design in order to submit your application. So if you have these things in your mind, then you have a better chance of your application being successful. So what they mean by creative people is that everybody has the opportunity to be creative, and you'll notice that they don't really use the word arts. They're really talking much more broadly. So it could be anything from sort of singing, photography, writing, painting, dancing. And the reasons that they want to get everybody creative is that they absolutely believe and have evidence that it reduces loneliness, that it makes us feel happy, it sustains older people, it develops skills and confidence in children and younger people, and it helps to build and strengthen social ties. So I think even just those snapshots of headings are really useful to bear in mind when you're planning your projects. So the creative people is really about who. The cultural communities is really about where things are going to happen. And transforming where people live. Now, historically in this country, we have a pretty bad rep for the arts only being accessible for a few people, and we could put that down to sometimes where that art happens. So this is about thinking about how we can improve lives and regenerate neighbourhoods, sort of support and sustain local economies, attract new visitors to our cities and towns, and also just bring people together for sort of a long-lasting effect on the people that live in those places. So I divide those two by thinking one about people and one about the place. And then both of those things sort of come together to create this sort of creative and cultural country. And what they mean by that is that hopefully, as a result of investing in those two things, we should end up with a society that is interesting and exciting, and a culture that is made by all people from all backgrounds. So it makes our culture strong, and that hopefully people start to aspire to be world leading, and that we can share the great wonderful art that we all make, even beyond our country, even though their focus, the majority of their money will go to money in England. That doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be aspiring for international presence. Now, they also have investment principles. So this is what they're thinking about. In addition to their criteria that they have these 4 principles. And they believe that if they apply this thinking when they're investing their money, that they will achieve the 3 outcomes: creative people, cultural communities, and creative and cultural communities. So those 4 investment principles are ambition and quality. So what they're looking for is, they actually write big, but I don't necessarily think they mean big. I don't think we always need to think big, but I certainly think they mean, aiming quite high. They're looking for quite exciting and excellent ideas. So I think it's really important when you're writing your bid to try to sell your project in that light, in whatever way that you can. I think sometimes as creatives we're really critical, and you don't need to be critical in an application. What you need to do is really sell it to them. They also say that they're interested in investing in people and organisations that are dynamic. And what they mean by that is flexible in this changing world. So I think what we have to bear in mind is that the strategy was developed during a time when we really don't know what's happening with Brexit. We don't know what the consequences of that will be. We're obviously living in very difficult economic times and also challenging environmental times. So what they need is, they need to invest in people who can be flexible based on the various crises that I'm sure we're going to experience over the next 10 years, which is light stuff. And then they're also interested in environmental responsibility, and I would encourage all of us to be starting to add lines into our budgets now around environmental responsibility. So this is about doing projects, but also looking after our planet. So really asking ourselves if we can design perhaps tours of our country that don't zigzag or go up and down the country, whether we can reduce mileage or the way that we travel, making sure that we're recycling. All of those things will become more and more important for the Arts Council as we move forward. And then inclusivity and relevance. So they want to make sure that everybody can enjoy culture. So this is something we really need to think about when we're designing our projects, that we're not just designing them for the same people. And by relevant, they used to say excellent more than or high quality, but now they're really starting to change their wording around that for relevant art. And I think that means art that really reflects the people and the world that we're living in right now. So project grants is one of their funding streams. They have multiple. It's the way that they distribute money, and it's the one that the vast majority of artists benefit from. So I'm going to focus mainly on under 15 applications, under £15,000 applications. And that's because the process is not that much different for over 15, other than you get a few extra word counts and they ask for a couple of extra attachments. And I put all of the notes for all of that stuff in this PowerPoint that you're going to get. So there's loads and loads more information here that you can use it as like an active resource after this session. Okay, so let's get cracking. So they have this online application process, and it basically goes through a portal that is called Grantium. Now, for those of you that know Grantium, you will know that it's painful and really inaccessible for the vast majority of individuals. So within the notes of this presentation, I've put through in all the guidance and as much step-by-step detail as I can to help you navigate that online system. What you have to do is you log on to a system and you have to create a user account and an applicant profile. And it can take them up to 5 days to validate that when you've gone through that process. And the reason I'm flagging that is because if you're like me and you're like a last minute Nelly, then that can cause you some problems if you've like sort of left it until last minute. So like I say, rather than talk through really dry, boring instructions, they're in the PowerPoint for you. So these are some of the things that you might want to apply for funding for. And this list is not exhausted by any stretch of the imagination, but that might be for festivals and carnivals. It might be for events or productions or exhibitions. That could be to do with artistic research and development. So rather than sort of producing something that's very public facing, it might be something you need to do to really research and understand an idea before you get to that point. They will fund you to then make the work. They'll fund any sorts of residencies or retreats. So if you need to go away and perhaps develop yourself or need some sort of space, sometimes we do international residencies where we send our artists off to another country to have a week of development, and that means that they come back all inspired and with a sort of different cultural influence in there as well. They would support you to commission artists. So perhaps if you're making a production, you might want to commission a composer, or you might want to commission a writer to work with you. They'll support you to tour your work. Also, that would be exhibitions or shows. They'll support digital projects, and this is becoming more and more of a priority for them. And I suspect probably more and more of us having to work digitally in these current times. They'll also fund participation projects, so workshops, audience development. That's a bit of a jargon term. What they mean is basically you just trying to engage with your audiences in some way, so that whatever it is that you present, you have people that want to engage with it. They'll fund your marketing activities, so that could be from photography, like promo images, to promo footage, to posters or flyers, or anything that you might need to be able to reach the people you want to reach. They will also fund your professional development and training. So as they said, not sort of university training or formal training, but if there's a workshop you could do with or some mentoring, then they'll certainly support those things as well. And they support organisational and business development. So say that you want to develop a board of directors, or you want to do a feasibility study to take on a studio or a space, they would fund those kinds of activities. And pretty much anything that's sort of arts related. So I think what's really important to know is Grants for the Arts is open to anyone. So I've worked with very commercial businesses, pubs, to put in applications for them to present arts evenings. So it isn't just coming from artists. As long as the activity has art at its heart, that's the hardest thing to say, then they're absolutely willing to consider that application. These are the 4 criteria that they base your application on. Now, interestingly, as they've said, there are these new like temporary equality like principles that have come about now, but actually they aren't yet sort of integrated into their decision-making process. And so we're going to still focus on these 4. So what they're looking at is the quality of the activity and the quality of the effect that that activity will have on either people that are involved in the activity or people that you're trying to engage in the activity, maybe participants or audiences. So this is really about you creating the best project that you can with the very best people that you can to create the very best experience for people. And I say that because I think quality is such a subjective word that you and I will all have really different interpretations of what that means. So your job in the application is just to present what you think quality is for you. And yeah, however that gets assessed, I'm not entirely sure, but make a strong case. And what I would say is avoid sort of just working with your local networks or your friends on projects just because it's easy. Really try to put together the very best, most diverse sort of collaborative teams that you can. And then engagements. So this is about how the public are going to engage with the activity. And so by engage, they mean participants or people that are involved in the activity. And it's worth bearing in mind that even though they have, there has to be some public benefit, for things like research and development, sometimes it's not quite appropriate to sort of expose it to the public. And therefore, in that section, you might want to be thinking about, in the longer term, how the public will benefit something. And so often we make our cases, particularly around research and development bids, where we're making a case about the kinds of public engagement that might happen at a slightly later stage. And then we have management, so how the activity will be managed. And so they want to know, can you manage the budget that you're going to be given? So I always think of this a bit like when you apply for a mortgage. no one wants to go through that process. But basically, nobody is going to give you a huge amount of money without trusting in you. And so the Arts Council processes, I would say, try to build trust with them. Therefore, you might want to start with sort of a smaller, reasonable amount of money and then grow that over time. And that also means that you can develop the systems and also maybe the support that you need around that. So if you don't feel comfortable with sort of project management, you might want to build a team of people around you to help with that, and they will fund that too. And then finances is the sort of fourth criteria, and they just want to know that their money is safe. But what I would say to you, and what the Arts Council don't say, is that it's really important to make a good case around value for money. And that's because they receive so many applications that I totally hear them when they say you only need 10% match funding and now you don't need any match funding for this current period. But the reality is that there will be people that go into that pot that have significant amounts of match funding. And in usual circumstances, those applications might be favoured. Now, they are saying that that won't happen between now and April, but it will be interesting to see the results of that, I think. So I would always recommend that you always try to find match funding from somewhere else, if at all possible. Okay, I know this gets super dry. Unfortunately, fundraising, the word in itself, the fun bit is really never hardly there. So I'm super sorry. I'm trying to make it as fun as I possibly can. So these are the questions. When they talk about their criteria, basically what they have done is they've split their project grant application into 4 main areas which follow the criteria, and these are the questions that when they're assessing quality that they will ask you. So they're asking you to tell them about you and your organisation and any relevant work and experience that you have. And what I would say here is this is really a place for you to go to town and sell yourself. So it's about any sort of training that you might have had previously, although I'm not going to put emphasis on that because I think the arts is for people that have not just gone through formal training too. But I think if you've had any sort of key artistic achievements, any exhibitions or productions or publications, if you've received any commissions or awards or even endorsements from people that have sort of appreciated your work, and any sort of key previous work that you have done, this is the section to really sell yourself and to give them confidence in you being an exceptional artist. And then the next question is, what is your proposed artistic activity and what do you want to achieve by doing it? Now, what I would say here is when typically artists send me their draft applications sometimes, they so often make the mistake of, and quite rightly, getting so excited about the art that they focus this section on the artistic idea. And I think that, of course, that's what's exciting, but actually in reality, the Arts Council are looking in this section for your aims and objectives of that project. So we normally only have a couple of lines actually that's dedicated to sort of what that artistic idea is about. And then we tend to put all of that wonderful stuff that artists are brilliant at writing into an appendices so that they can really understand what the idea is behind the sort of artistic idea. But typically we might be saying things, for example, like this project is to support a 5-week creation period and a 10-date national tour to small-scale theatres. So it's that sort of language that we're using rather than sort of flowery, articulate, artistic language. And I think it's worth noting that the vast majority of sort of under 15 applications get assessed by administrators and not people that necessarily understand your art form. So the more that you can avoid that, beautiful articulation of what you do, unfortunately, the chances are that will mean that you're more successful. And they also want to know, let me see, they want to know about how your project is going to develop you. And so we typically divide this section into 3. And so we'll talk about like the artistic development or the personal development for you. We then might also talk about like the business development and the sector development. So the difference is we sort of focus on whether artistically you might be trying out a new approach or new ways of working. And then when we talk about the business, we might be talking about raising your profile. We might be talking about sort of new collaborations or new partnerships. And sector development is a little bit like, and how does the rest of the sector benefit from that? So typically I find if you touch upon all of those 3 things, and that can give you quite a strengthy application. The other question that they ask you is to outline each person that you're going to work with. And this is why it's so important for you to consider a diverse team. And I don't just mean ethnicity, I'm talking about class, I'm talking about race, gender, also sort of different art forms or different disciplines. And they want you to describe their work. So again, this is your opportunity to sell the people that you're working with. And if those people have websites or examples of their work online, then I highly recommend adding those to the application also. And so these are the types of things that in that quality section that they are looking for. The strength of your idea. And when they say the strength, what they really mean is, can they understand what your idea is? So have you expressed it in a way that anybody that doesn't understand your art form will be able to understand it? They also want to know that you're likely to achieve your ambition. So often what we do when we're creating, I mean, because it's productions we create, often we break them down into sort of smaller realistic chunks. So to make one show, we might have 3 different Arts Council applications to fund that one show. So we wouldn't typically go straight into creation. We do a sort of research period, and then we might do a development and some sort of pilot tour where we might test it in front of some safe audiences and see whether they respond well, and then go into a sort of creation and a sort of mini tour. So I think don't be afraid to sort of break your project down into bite-sized chunks, and that will give them greater confidence in that being realistic. They're also really keen that the project develops your skills and the people involved in the project as well. So that's they know that investing in your skills will mean that any future projects are only going to be of higher quality. And also about the people involved. So they're going to be looking at their track record. So if you're working with people that don't have a track record, then you might just want to think about about why they're involved in your project. And I'm not suggesting you shouldn't involve them in your project, but you certainly would want to make a case around why the particular individuals have been selected, and therefore the quality of their work. So what I can say is that the application in itself, personally, I find the simplest part of the process. The hardest bit is putting all of the planning in phase. So designing those teams and how those projects are going to happen. So just give yourself plenty of time to do all of that prep work before you sort of get phased by the application process. But yes, the application process, I find that the process of the questions can really help you think through a project as well. Okay, so these are their questions around public engagement. So they ask you who will engage with your project. And here, typically, artists will say to me, well, I want everyone, anyone and everyone to engage with our project. And actually, that really weakens your argument. So what I would recommend to you is that you are really, really specific about who you want to benefit from your project. that doesn't mean that a wider demographic, a wider group of people couldn't engage with your project. But the more specific that you can be, that means that you can tailor all of the marketing around who it is you're trying to reach. So for example, we might say that we're specifically looking to target a South Asian demographic that are aged between, or might have an age on it, and their interests are, and we might even say that they might be like regular theatre goers, they might be people that have disposable income. Now, there is an audience agency website, and I've got the link in this PowerPoint for you, and they've done lots and lots of research into who engages in the arts, and they've come up with these brilliant fancy terms that are very confusing if you don't work in the arts. They describe different sort of groups of people as metro cultural buffs. I mean, it's really not accessible. It's quite amusing language though, but it is a language. The Arts Council invested a lot in that organisation, and it is a language that the Arts Council know. So I would recommend you going on the audience agency website to understand who those groups are and using that language to help articulate the kinds of people that you are trying to reach. I think also it's worth saying like why the activity is appropriate for the kind of people that you're trying to reach. And I would encourage all of you in all of your projects to in some way try to engage people that currently aren't engaged in the arts. So if we're just talking about regular theatre going audiences, then is there something that you can do that might include people that wouldn't normally engage with the arts? They want to know about the experience that the individuals that you engage might have. And so that's really not just about saying then who it is you're going to involve, but exactly sort of how those people are going to get involved. And the trick with this is when it's research and development and you might not be engaging with the public at this point. And so we tend to find ways talking around, it might be writing blogs, why people are creating their work. It might be around having a really strong social media presence when people are in the studio. I think more and more sort of live streaming from the studio or holding online discussions can be a way that you can comfortably engage the public in an R&D process if it's not quite right for them to be actively involved in it. Now, I would say that the Let's Create strategy is asking us to think more and more on that actually, and they're really thinking about how we can get the public involved even in the earliest stages. So thinking about whether you're building sort of there's actually a creative council, right, that Bradford Producing Hub have, which isn't necessarily all artists that are advising them. So those kinds of things you might want to be thinking about how you can get ordinary, normal citizens involved to give you feedback on your work. And I think part of this is that it is public money, and we don't make a great case in the arts for public investment. But I think there's some recognition that if we can do that and we can turn the vast majority of our country on with the arts, then the likelihood is we might start to see more and more investment. And they want to know how you will make sure your project is then going to reach those people. So to make that clear, you've decided who you're trying to reach, how you're trying to engage them, and then this bit is much more around sort of marketing the activity. So how is it that those people that you want to reach are going to know that your activity is happening? So this could be around any planned marketing activities that you have. And then, so how they assess this section, again, they're looking at the strong case for public engagement. So they really make a case about the public being involved, clear target audiences. They're looking, if you can engage with those with little to no experience of the arts, you're going to get bonus points for that. And on their website, actually, they will tell you sort of areas that are least engaged, which helps you to sort of prioritize those. For those of you that are Bradford based, you might want to look at the LEAP program, and they've identified, I think it's 5 or 6 areas across Bradford that are particularly low engaged areas, and I'd encourage you to be working within them if you can. Well-defined marketing plans, so when your posters are going to go out, how many you might print, and then access and diversity is also being considered. So, for example, if you need to have various formats of marketing produced, then they will be looking for that kind of commitment in your application. And I put here in this like bubble at the bottom left-hand corner, to include figures. And I think even if you just estimate how many people you think you're going to engage, these might go wildly up or wildly down, but it gives them a bit more trust that you've really thought it through. So we typically would write sort of like a social media presence. We might write 5,000 people that might come across some of our posts. We might write a workshop. Hard to deliver workshops right now, but a workshop, there might be 30 people. So we really try to put a figure to every single activity that it is, so that then we can say in total we think there's going to be this amount of people that engage with it. And sometimes they are wild guesses, but actually I think for them it just helps them have trust in you that you've considered it in detail. And then we have questions about finances. So they want to know how you've raised any other money that might come into the activity, or how you plan to raise any money, and where sort of that income has come from. Now, as the Arts Council said, they are forgiving at the moment for people that don't have any income from other sources. But I would really recommend trying to get money from other places. Feel free to chip in if you've had money from other places and you again want to put it in the chat or share examples. But some of those might be through various commissions. So it might be through the local authority, it might be through local venues or museums. Now, I think the reason why they've dropped the match funding at the moment is because some of this might feel really unrealistic to get. It might be business sponsorship, it might be through philanthropy, it might be through crowdfunding. I mean, these are just some of the ways that you might be able to attract other money into your project. I could do a whole other session on where else to get money from other than the Arts Council. And unfortunately, we're not covering it today, but Shazia is here, so if we need that, we can plug it for her to sort out. So then they want to know, oops, I'm sorry, how you will manage the budget. So what they want to know is it's safe when it lands with you. So the types of things that we typically write about is that the money is either going to go into a separate project account or a separate business account. So I'm not going to accidentally spend it on holiday or getting my nails done. And we'll tell them about the types of systems we have in place. It might be that we use an online accounting system. It might be that every transaction gets signed off by myself and a colleague. It might be that you keep running cash flow of your project, and that every month you review that cash flow alongside your statements. So it's practical details around how you will manage that budget and what experience you've got of that. So again, typically we would write, we've had experience of being awarded this size of money, and therefore we know how to do that. We've delivered projects on time before and within budget. So it's all about like basic sort of math skills, that when they give you that money, you're not going to run off and spend it on something else. If you're nervous about money and managing money, I highly recommend that you then work with some kind of project manager. So if you're like, oh, I don't feel like I can make a strong case for managing the finances, then they absolutely would rather support you to work with somebody that has those skills, rather than you end up in a pickle through that project and have sort of mismanaged some of that money. And yes, the final question is how you've worked out any costs. So again, that might be that you do like online research of travel costs, and yeah, fact check what everybody's being paid. Okay. And this is how they are assessing it. So they're checking that the budget is appropriate for the activity. So they have a specialist team in Manchester that are like wizards with money. And they're so used to looking at project budgets that they can tell really quickly if you've been realistic or unrealistic, which is why I think it's good that if you know people that have put in a bid that's been successful, talk to them and try to gather examples. I have loads of examples of varying budgets that I'm more than happy to share with people if it's useful to see what's realistic to achieve. I also have loads of bids as well that I can anonymise the names and help you if that's useful to share. Then also they want to know that you've really thought about all the areas of your spending. So say, for example, that you write that you're going to deliver 10 workshops to young people across Bradford, and then they can't see in your budget where those, who is delivering those and where that has been budgeted. They might start to have doubts about whether you're really going to deliver that activity. So it's making sure you cross-reference all your budget lines with your project to make sure you've covered everything. Again, appropriate fees or wages, research quotes. They are looking at whether you've attracted funding from elsewhere and also if that is confirmed. So what I should say is the more confirmed any support that you have, the greater chance of success you have for your application. So if you put your application in at a point when you've not done a great amount of work on it and it's more of an idea than it is an actual plan, you are less likely to receive the funding. So sometimes even if our activity is a bit wish-washy, I don't paint that picture to the Arts Council. We paint a very firm, clear picture to them to give them the confidence in that investment. Okay, and then these are the questions about management. So this is about you and your partner's experience. And I would certainly say that when you're putting together your projects, really think about the partners and the organisations that you want to involve in it, because their credibility will help them have the confidence in your ability to manage it, but also the quality of the activity. So they don't state that you should have MPO organisations written into your partners. We tend, MPO being National Portfolio Organisations, which is a different pot of money that the Arts Council fund and really like sort of supports the infrastructure that we all rely on, so the organisations. We try to always put at least one of them into our applications and build them in as a partner, even though that's not something that they mention. And we do that because the Arts Council are already investing money in them. So they're already committed to them. They already believe in the quality of their work and what they manage. And therefore we can pull some of that confidence into our applications. I would also say that more and more the Arts Council are going to be looking for partnerships outside of the arts. So I think around universities, arts and wellbeing, social justice system, I think you name it, I think actually more and more we're going to be heading in that direction. The Let's Create strategy has huge potential for us to be radically different about how we've been doing the arts for a long while. So I would encourage us all to be thinking that way. They want to know about any preparation that you've done before you put in this activity. So they won't fund you for that time that you've done, but they will want to know, for example, whether the artists that you've listed in your application, whether you've had conversations with them, whether you've got artistic briefs, whether all of your partners are on board, whether you've really thought about the timescale of that activity. And then they give you a table where you can put in the main stages of your planning. And I've seen people fill this out in various different ways. We try to put as much information as we can. So every single task that we might have to do from the second that money lands in our bank account. So that might be everything from, yes, when a sort of rehearsal period might happen or a creation period might happen, but we will also include sort of when our marketing deadlines might be, when we're looking to contract the artist, when we'll be looking to book travel and accommodation, and all of that again just helps them know that you have thought through every step of your activity. And then they want to know how you will evaluate your activity. So in this question, they're really asking you to go back to your aims that you write in the quality section and to tell them how you're going to know how you've met those aims. So that could be qualitative and quantitative. So it might be figures, that all of those figures you wrote in the sort of public engagement section about the amount of people, you might be tracking those as you go through the project. It might also be some of the softer, I would say more important information around how people felt when they engage with your activity. But you might want to say that, for example, you'll do questionnaires or one-to-ones with people. There might be follow-up consultation with participants to see what the impacts of the activity was on them. But they want to know that what you set out as your ambition and what you said would make your project successful, your evaluation is really checking whether you managed to achieve that or not. And you get the opportunity to write about all of this in a report. And it's totally okay if you don't manage to achieve all of those things. I think at that point, that's when you can be really honest with the Arts Council and say, do you know what, we learned that this approach didn't work for us, and so next time we'll take this approach. So in the application bit, keep it positive and confident and no cracks in your thinking. And then in the report, you can be a bit more reflective, which allows you to then, if you go in for another phase, say we've developed the project in this way from when we delivered it the first time. And here's what they're looking up for in the management section, which is if the activity is realistic and well planned. So that might be your schedules. Also, that it shows your ability to manage the activity, and if you don't have that ability, someone else has that. You've brought in someone else that has that ability. If you have any track record, and yeah, appropriate partnership, and then also about the evaluation. So that they're the prompts that they're working through when they're reading your answers. Okay. That is like the 4 major parts of the application. There's some grant writing tips here that I think you can apply to any application. I would use simple and easy to understand language, so plain English where you can. And like I say, in any attachments, you can use the flowery, beautiful, artistic stuff. I would, any funder that you're applying for, whether this is commissions or Arts Council, I would echo the words that they use. So typically we spend quite a lot of time looking through people's websites and highlighting the kind of words that they use to describe the kind of projects that they're looking for. So you find things on the Arts Council about innovation, about high quality, and we just repeat them back to them. They very typically don't give you the space to explain what you mean by high quality or what you mean by innovative. But if you describe your project as a high quality and innovative piece of art, for some reason, they believe you. I would also say that keep your sentences really, really short. So we typically, our sentences are never more than about 10 or 12 words. So if you've got loads of commas and really long, complex sentences that take some taking in, I would just scrap them from your application. Like really make sure they're short sentences. It helps them remember. So I think what's worth knowing is that sometimes the Arts Council might be looking at your application alongside maybe 30 to 50 other applications, and then they take them to a panel to talk about. So they need to remember what your activity is, and those short sentences can really help. If you can use bullet points or headings in each of the sections, I highly recommend that too. Really make sure that you're answering the questions that they're asking and not giving them the information you want to tell them. Go into as much detail as you possibly can, and that will mean that it takes you twice as long to do your application than anyone else, but that's totally fine because you'll be one of the successful ones and they won't. And I would highly recommend that you try to present, when you're talking about in the quality section, try to present the problem that you're trying to solve or the difference that you want to make, either in the world or in the sector, so that it touches like their heart. So it's not just coming from this sort of self-centered, artistic, and I think those people are really valuable in the world also, but I do think to capture people's hearts and minds, if you can frame that in the world and the problems that we're facing and how this might contribute, then it's very hard to turn down those applications. If you have a friend that can look over it, that would be really helpful. And I would recommend only submitting what is requested. So not all funders, but some can write you out if you go over what they ask for example. I have put some frequently asked questions here, but you might have loads of others. So chip in. So when can I apply? So there are no deadlines with project grants. You can put your application in at absolutely any point, and it will take them 6 or 12 weeks to assess it. 6 weeks if it's under 15,000, 12 weeks if it's over. Do you need match funding? Not at this point, but in the future I suspect that will be back. If it's unsuccessful, can you apply again? You absolutely can, but if it was unsuccessful the first time, try to understand what was unsuccessful about it so that you don't just end up in a loop of continuous unsuccessful applications. How many times can you apply? You can apply as many times as you like. You can only have one application and assessment each time. So typically the artists that we're working with might have 2, 3, or sometimes 4 Arts Council applications and different projects all on the go at any one time, but they weren't on the portal and in assessment at the same time. So I think sometimes people think you have to wait until one application is finished before one project is finished before you can move on to the next. But typically we find the artists that we work with that are most financially secure and stable have typically got multiple project grants running at the same time. Are there any other questions that have come up in the process that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, there's 2 questions. One from earlier, just getting it up. Could Sarah clarify when she spoke of splitting the project into sections, such as research, development and delivery, did she say those better to be separate applications when under 15k? And if so, can they all be in the same financial year, sorry?
Yeah, so yes, typically, say I'm trying to give examples, but say that we have a full-length production that we want to tour nationally. We would break that down into, it might be like a month of research, and that's one project in itself. And then we finish that, and then we go back in for a second lot of money. So typically when it's those small projects, we're going for sort of under £15,000. And then we might go in for like this, if you like, a development period. And that would probably be just edging over £15,000, but probably between sort of £15,000 to £30,000. And that would be another project. And that might be, for example, 6 weeks in the studio. And it might be at that point, say, bringing in different collaborators. And then we might go for a bigger creation grant. So it's very rare that one of our shows gets funded through one grant. Typically there's various phases that we've gone through to achieve it, and that you can wrap them all into the same project grant. I personally find that it limits your risk if you're asking it, sort of incrementing their investment, and it means that they get buy-in quite early on, which means they might be more trusting as you increase your ask. But also it gives you an opportunity to keep evaluating your project as you go along. So if you change your mind, or if your artistic idea evolves, you're not tied to that original thought that you had, whether that's that you need new collaborators or you need a different team or something didn't work. But we have a project at the moment that is on its 3rd application, which is still research. We're nowhere near development, creation, touring. It's nowhere near the public at the minute, It's just taking a really long time to figure out what the show is and how that will work. And mainly because it's just been quite a complex creative process with different collaborators involved that are understanding themselves, and that's totally fine to do that. So yeah, break it into realistic chunks. And I think also, I tend to find that as you get to that creation part and the presenting to the public, that typically is the bit that costs the most amount of money, which is when you really then need that match funding in order to make a big ask to the Arts Council. So if you've gone through sort of stages of research and development, you can use that time to be building sort of support from other places, whether that's partnerships or sponsorship. So sometimes we work with individual fundraisers in that sort of research and development phase so that they can be sort of generating that match funding for us as we're developing, so that we've got the match funding we need when we go in for the creation.
Thank you, Sarah. So we've got 3 more questions come up. We've got, do they always give feedback if you are unsuccessful?
If you go for over £15,000, you will get to see the assessment that they wrote, which is really helpful because you can see the scoring and whether you were very strong in some areas or not in others, which really helps. You can just say, oh, actually, I had a weak financing section, I can just improve that section and resubmit. When you do an under 15, it's really difficult to get feedback, and you'll normally get really vague feedback, which will either be like comparatively weaker than other applications, or other applications preferred. And that's really useless feedback. They're working on making it better, but it doesn't tell you a great detail. So my advice at that point would be to get somebody else to have a look over it and see if they can spot any flaws in that. I would encourage all of you, and it's trickier these days, but to try to build a relationship with your relationship manager for your art form or area. And that might even just be via email. So the Arts Council have relationship managers like Kristian and Desiree, and they are there to sort of support people that might want to come into grants for the arts. And there will be a different one for a different art form in different areas. So if it's worth trying to contact the inquiries line at Arts Council England to see if they will connect you with that person. Sometimes they're a bit gatekeepery and aren't great at doing that. But also maybe ask other artists from your discipline or other artists in your area if they have a relationship with that person and whether they could introduce you. And the difference is that then when you get that really vague under 15 application, you can ask them to have a sneaky look and see if they can give you something more personal. And sometimes they will do that.
Thank you. Kata said, I like to apply for the under 15k for R&D and to have time to think and plan. Would you suggest doing these as separate applications or in one application?
Yeah, I think would the research and development be for a particular artistic product, like project, or is that just part of thinking time? Is my question back.
Kat, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, it would be for a particular project for the R&D for a particular artwork.
Yeah, so if I was you, I would go in, I'd put them both together if you can afford to do that, that there's enough money for you in that under 15 to do that. But I would certainly, because what your research and development will give you is the artistic bit to talk about, which will help you with quality and to think about public engagement. And so that artistic idea will make them like hang on to it and remember it, but there's no reason why you can't build in additional sort of thinking time that's broader than that project within that budget. And I think you'd have a really strong case of saying that also that's to do with sustaining you and your practice during these COVID-19 times. I think they're really aware that artists might not be able to deliver in the same way and earn an income in the same way that they might have done previously. And therefore, I would probably put in an application that would be along the lines of saying, I'm asking for money to support me over, say, a 6-month period. that is to support me to do research and development on this particular project, but also have this broader creative thinking time. And what I would say is that you might want to be really specific about how you're going to do that thinking time, or exactly what that might be, so that it just doesn't look like it's additional time that's not clear.
Next question is, do we need to apply for under 15K if it's our first time to apply? Is there more of a chance to get it?
But the Arts Council say this every single time, yes. The first application I got was £42,000. So I don't think that's true in all cases. The reason that went through at that, though, was because I'd managed to get £12,000 from elsewhere. So I think it's based on your match funding, that if you have the match, maybe not now in these times, but typically to show and to demonstrate that you can manage their money safely, they might expect you to jump through that hoop first. But actually, it's not a criteria. They don't say you have to do that.
We've got Kristian and Desiree back from Arts Council as well. So if you've got any particular questions for them, you can ask them as well.
Hi, so I've got a question, I guess, for Desi and Kristian. It's kind of about specific project, but I guess it maybe is helpful for other people as well. So Sarah and I are working on a project currently that was, it's, as Sarah said, we've gone through several stages of R&Ds in smaller bits, and now we finally had a big amount of funding so that we could finally go into production and a national tour. We had 2 stages for production. This was in autumn, and then the second part of it was meant to happen in spring. Obviously, COVID happened, and it turns out the project is now realistically not going to be able to be delivered until autumn 2021. So it's kind of like a 2-year gap between the original premiere date and when it's realistically going to happen. So I guess my question is along the lines of, I think, Desi, you mentioned earlier what the Arts Council isn't funding. I guess it's because of it happening in such a space of time. Will there be a fund available to support projects that can realistically happen without any more funds? And I ask this because of obviously the quality of a work that was rehearsed in September 2019 is not the same, and if it's obviously performed in 2021. Things have happened, like for instance, part of our team was from the European Union. Brexit is now coming into place, so obviously there's all the costs involving visas and all those things that we didn't budget in originally. So I just wanted to know if there's any information or any ideas about supporting projects that are already started but cannot happen without further support.
So Carlos's Wi-Fi was just cutting in and out, so I'll just summarise. Basically, Carlos has a project grant at the moment, and in order to deliver that project successfully, might need extra cash than what was originally budgeted for. How should he go about that? Can he put in an additional project grant, or does he have to reduce what the delivery was on the grant that he's already got?
Hi, Desi here. My feeling would be that in terms of the guidance that we've just got, that we went through earlier, it's not additional activity. And I know in one of my slides, it was very clear that if the costs have since increased, and or you think that the project will take longer to deliver, then that you can't really come in for additional money. So it's only if it's additional to the project that you're doing. I appreciate that maybe, if you're a venue and you need, more, you need to contend with kind of social distancing, that there's a cost within that. But I think because you've already had the funding and the funding's in place, is that correct?
Yeah.
I think it's about changing. I think it's about notifying grant management, and what you would be proposing is how you reconfigure that budget. I don't think there is opportunity to apply for more because of that change in circumstance. So I think you might have to work within what you've already got, what's already been awarded, and it might be that you condense it down, and and then come in for another element do you know what I mean of it? But yeah. I think it's a first conversation. I think you need to think about how you might reconfigure that project. And I think we're open to things being, we're flexible for things to be reconfigured. So it might be that you say, actually, realistically, I can only develop this element of it, and this is what the budget is going to cover because of COVID-19. And it might be that you separate key strands out of it. So you condensed your tour, and then you can put in another project application for just that, a different element of it. So that, I think the first thing, the first thing is to speak to grant management, but come up with a proposal. But there's not, we won't be able, if it's already been awarded, we will not be able to, allow you to apply for extra funds to kind of bolster that up and take account of the changes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's it could be about kind of summarizing one approach might be to revise expectations of what's possible within that amount, and to speak to grant management and get approval for that. And then whatever other ambition there is for the project, then to come in for that as a separate project grant application. Yeah. Does that sound right? Yep.
Yeah. And with regards to obviously you said there's funding available to think and to take time and to reimagine. Would say, for example, because this is a production to happen in a more traditional kind of theater setup, would we be able to access that fund so we can reimagine how this work can happen? You know what I mean? So we'll be applying for this particular project, but just to take time to think about how we can continue working.
Well, I would say absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of artists that look to transfer work from a venue to an outdoor setting. Even though it's the same work, you're retouring it, but you're reimagining it in a different context. So so that would be, for me, that would be progressive, and it would be developmental of an existing project. But then it almost becomes a new project, because it's time to think, to test, to trial out those new ways of working and what that might mean. So Okay.
Would business funding that we're applying for because we are a community interest company be allowed as match funding by the Arts Council, or would it be disallowed because we've got double funding for the same, possibly the same project? How does other funding, how does the Arts Council consider other funding when they are looking at an application?
I think in terms of funding from a business sector, it depends on whether that's within the realm of emergency funding, and it's for the purpose of surviving. So it's not necessarily for levering monies from Arts Council, but if it was for any other from any other project source, then that is not Arts Council, then you can use it as match. So I think from a business source, as long as it's not from the government scheme, we've been very clear that if you've been in receipt of that for a specific purpose, then it's not necessarily for you to use as match funding, although some of it might have been to sustain some activity.
I'm not sure how that funding, I think this is, Desi's kind of touching on this, like what the intention of that funding is, and then how that ties to a project grant. So but it's only in terms of the double, you mentioned kind of double funding. Like our primary concern about double funding is if we've already funded it as Arts Council. Right. So say we funded a national portfolio organisation, and in their application they've said they're delivering a show, and then they come to us for project grants asking for money for that same show. That's what double funding is. But if you're concerned, the inquiries team are actually the best people for eligibility, because they talk about eligibility until the end of time. So the poor things. So if you're a little bit concerned about that, double check with them. But to highlight right now that, as I think both Desi and I touched on, match funding is less of a concern right now. So particularly, so we kind of completely understand we're aware of the fact that it's just more difficult right now to have any kind of match, which is why we've removed the 10% requirement for project grants for under 15,000.
Yeah,
so don't feel like you need to look for it,
Yeah, I would just add, I suppose, because I don't know the remit of the government funding that's coming in place. For example, I don't think we'd necessarily expect to see somebody that had been in receipt of our emergency response fund money to see that evidenced as match in a project grant. So I think it just depends on the purpose of that funding, really.
Yeah, with our emergency fund, we kind of expected to a certain extent that it was just to let people, pay their rent. We weren't necessarily expecting it was something that would be going towards future projects.
Hiya, I'm just going to read what I wrote in the chat. An over 50s group I run has recently set up as an unincorporated association, and we're building a performance company, but it's still very much kind of driven by me. So I'm just wondering, should we apply as an organisation, or is it better for me to apply as an individual wanting to run a project? And I'm just kind of writing the application at the minute. And I guess the reason why I'm asking is because I'm struggling with I'm writing it from the organisation point of view, but I'm struggling how much information to include about me in the questions. Any thoughts? Much appreciated.
I would say it doesn't. Actually, under normal conditions, it doesn't matter massively. The only kind of warning I give to people if they're going from individual to organisation is that as part of project grants, when we're assessing, we get a little kind of blurb on the history and the funding history of the organisation or the person, the applicant, whether they're a first-time applicant or whether they've applied a couple of times before. So if you change from one kind of applicant to another kind of applicant, the system might not pick up your history. So if you have an amazing funding history as an individual and it's your first time as an organisation, but you want to demonstrate, look how amazing I am with my track record, perhaps ensure that you transfer that across. Having, as in the body of the application, explaining this is your funding history. Having said that, we have kind of stated now that individuals in particular at this time are a priority for funding. And that we're keen to support that. So, yeah. Desi, would you add anything to that?
No, I would just agree with the last thing that Kristian said, because it might be that you have capacity to employ a number of independents, and that should probably be stressed if that's the way that you want to go. But it really, I think, it really is about sort of a track record and who kind of owns that, whether it's you as an individual. It also depends on your future ambitions. 5 years from now, will the company exist if you're not leading it? So do you want to give it some autonomy, or is it really your kind of baby and you're kind of leading it? I think that those are things that you kind of need to weigh up, sort of short and long term.
I just want to say thank you to everybody joining tonight's session, and thank you to Sarah, Desi and Kristian as well for showing expertise and knowledge.